So the more sensitive you are, the more you feel. Now, the more you feel, of course, the more you absorb and sense and get in tune with the environment, which is what artists do. Poets, artists, actors, creators of, sculptors, actors, dancers. It's like they have these antennae out that just pull in energies, which really promotes what you call the superpower of creativity. But that same sensitivity also makes them more susceptible to pain, because the same touch that would be experienced as trivial by somebody less sensitive really might hurt the sensitive person. So when you get sensitivity combined with trauma or stress, you get a lot more need to protect yourself. Hence the high rate of addiction amongst, say, actors and musicians. Because they're the sensitive people, they're hurting more.
Yeah.
They have more of a need to escape from their addictions. And you get one Hollywood story after another of some big star divulging their addiction so that same sensitive temperament in a supportive, loving environment just becomes a wonderful, creative leader, joyful, intuitive person. But in an unsupportive environment, they become more distorted, more hurt, more defensive. The creativity doesn't go away, but the creativity starts to serve the personality. And so you look at all these great artists and actors and musicians who their creativity was so amazing that it leads them to stardom. But on a personal level, they just die, and sometimes literally they die. And there's so many examples of it.
Yeah, it's like the sensitivity is almost like we would have a piano, and from all the way to the end of to the top is like the full spectrum.
Yeah.
The more sensitive we are, the more we have access to within the spectrum of like the human experience.
Exactly.
So it's a beautiful thing to have access to the full piano, to the full spectrum of our emotions, to this human experience. But I think, that invitation that you're sharing is to not have it just serve your personality, but to allow it be an expression from your soul.
Exactly.
And not just our conditioning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In the book, we give the example of Aretha Franklin, by the way, who there's a wonderful documentary about her where she gives a concert. I think here in LA, maybe in a church here when she was quite young, and she's just channeling God. I mean, that's the only way you can put it, and that's just coming through her. And then she's got this song R-E-S-P-C-T, Respect, which is kind of an anthem of the women's movement. And she herself was not respected at all. She was an abused child and an abused woman. She had this great creativity, incredible talent. But she was hobbled from being her true self in her personal life. And I think that contributed to the illness stuff.
Sensitivity is not weakness, it is capacity. Dr. Maté just revealed what so many of us lived without understanding. Sensitive children absorb everything. They feel more. They sense more. And when the environment isn't supportive, the same gift that creates art and intuition becomes the source of deep pain. Your sensitivity wasn't a mistake. It was a message. Let's go deeper.
The more sensitive you are by nature, genetically, the more hurt you're going to be. Some of the worst criminals are the most sensitive people in the world. And by sensitive, I don't mean that they're aware and care for the feelings of others. I mean that they were born so sensitive that they were hurt much more easily than others. They felt more. When they were hurt, they felt more. The more they felt, the more pain they felt, the more they had to shut down. The more they shut down, the less compassionate and the more cruel they became. once those of them that can work through their pain and their trauma actually become very sweet and loving people. And I've seen this repeatedly, and so have many others. So that's an example of what Almas was talking about, is that the lack of compassion is a hidden hurt, is based on a hidden hurt.
Gabor, do you believe, it sounds like you do from what you're saying, that we're born with different levels of sensitivity, that some of us are genetically more sensitive than others? And what is the research behind that? Or
Well, that's the research. Is that some are just born more sensitive than others, and that means certain chemical messengers in their brains are differently configured. And it means that these people, when they're well treated, they become creators and artists and leaders and shamans and whoever, joyful. But when they're hurt, they're traumatized all the more. And there's I think a Canadian born, but now he's working in California, a pediatrician called Tom Boyce, who wrote a book called Daffodils and Dandelions. And one of them is the very sensitive kid. And the less sensitive kid, they can endure a whole range of experiences and not be so hurt by it. The more sensitive ones, they're more hurt. So I think that's what's genetic. When the people talk about genes for addiction or mental health issues, no. What they're actually finding is genes for sensitivity, which means that the environment acting on those sensitive genes will create more pain. And all addictions and all mental health conditions, in my view, are ways of coping with pain. And so the more sensitive you are, the more prone you are to fall into one of those diagnostic categories, not because the genes dictate those categories, but because the sensitivity potentiates the pain that you're trying to escape from. That's my understanding.
And do you think you're one of those people who has hypersensitivity genetically?
I don't know. I see people. Well, I truly don't know. I see people far more sensitive than I am, far more affected by what happens. Far more overwrought when things go wrong. Now, maybe I have more defenses in a way. I certainly am sensitive. I do feel and see things that other people often don't. But I wouldn't put myself in the most sensitive category, not compared to some people that I know.
Yeah, I think the question that comes up for me and is, I've heard a lot of people use highly sensitive person language to sort of defend or explain why it's so hard for them to make healing progress in their life or this or that. And I wonder how to not use that information or that possibility as a kind of excuse for all kinds of things.
Yeah, it should not be a limitation. It should actually be opening for more liberation and more creativity and more joy and more freedom, actually, properly understood. So neither are genetically determined temperament, if you like, nor what's happened to us should ever be used as an excuse for just staying static and stuck in a certain pattern. The more sensitive you are, it also means when the environment is more supportive and you take on the task of healing, you're also more capable of growth. So it should on no account be an excuse.
What he just explained is profound. People who hurt others were often the ones hurt the deepest. Not because they are bad, but because they shut down. Sensitivity makes pain louder. Pain makes escape urgent. And shutting down makes us unrecognizable, even to ourselves. But sensitivity is also what makes healing possible. There is one final piece you need to hear.
This child would make more sense, or would be more appealing to me.
Well, you have to think of sensitive in terms of its word origin. Now, the word sensitive came from the Latin word sensire, to feel. Mm-hmm. So the sensitive person feels more.
Yeah.
So the example I often give is And that can lead to both very positive and very difficult consequences. For example, if I tapped you on the shoulder right now, you wouldn't feel any pain at all. But if you were not wearing a shirt and your skin was exposed, furthermore, if you had a burn on your shoulder, so your nerve endings were close to the surface, if I tapped you with the same force, you'd feel extreme, excruciating pain, even though the external event was no different.
Right.
So sensitivity magnifies the pain that we have. Sensitivity also leads to more creativity. So very often, the most creative people also have the most pain. Which is why so many creative people escape from their pain through all kinds of dysfunctions like addictions and so on. So there's a real link between creativity and sensitivity, and creativity and sensitivity and suffering at the same time. The Gifted Child, the German title of which was Prisoners of Childhood, was really all about the fact that stuff happens to us as children, negative things happen, then we adapt to those things by taking on certain defensive ways of being, and then we relive the rest of our lives from those defensive modes. So we're not actually experiencing the present, we're constantly reliving the past from a perspective that we acquired when we were helpless and vulnerable children. And when she says the gifted child, she means the sensitive child. So the more sensitive the child is, the more he or she feels the pain and stress of the environment, and the more affected they are, and the more that shapes their lives. And that book came along for me when I was in my 40s, and I was a successful doctor, and I was a father, but I was depressed, I was anxious, I was a driven workaholic. You wouldn't have known that when you saw me on the job. But inside me, I was discouraged. I had difficulties in my marriage, with my children. I felt they were afraid of me, and they were, because of my rages. And that book helped me understand. It was the first book to help me understand where all that came from. So that was, for me, as for many other people, a seminal read. And really, my whole work since then has been to help liberate people from that prison that childhood often imposes on so many of us. Well,
To me, anyway.
well, I think it's a more accurate title, but there's two things I would say in response. First of all, why do you resist your own giftedness? You're clearly gifted. That's the first point I would make. Now, the other thing goes back to what you said about these people that you know who are high performers. Look at that word performers. What does it mean to perform? One meaning of it is to put on a show.
Sure, that's one meaning.
And I would have been one of these people who was a high performer. In other words, look at us from the outside, a successful family doctor, director of a palliative care unit at a major hospital, national columnist for Canadian newspaper, writing medical columns, performing at a high level. And inside, again, anxious, frustrated, depressed, discouraged. And in my personal life, a lot of suffering. So a lot of people who perform well are actually deeply troubled inside. And of course, there's many famous examples of that. Some of the greatest performers, like Presley or Marilyn Monroe, and any number of people I could name, that's what they were. They were performers. And even from themselves, they hid their own suffering. Well, yes. So the first question is, why would anybody dissociate? Not that you do it, by the way. You don't dissociate. Your brain does it automatically. I mean, do you decide, Miriam, do you decide all of a sudden, I'm going to dissociate now? Okay, no. No, don't think about yourself. Well, why would any human being, why would any human organism do that? Exactly. And its origins are always in childhood, when the brain is developing. So that, like, for example, my ADHD, my tuning out, which is a milder form of dissociation, was a response to circumstances that as an infant I couldn't handle. So that the brain tunes out as a way of defending itself from the overwhelming stress. And it's doing so when the brain is developing, when all the circuits are being laid down. So the tuning out, the dissociation, actually becomes wired in. And later on, it takes very little to trigger it. Well, it's a bit like asking, how do you prevent trauma when deeply Black in a racist society? Because this society
does not honor vulnerability. In fact, it kind of shuns it. You're being weak. How many times have you been told, don't be so sensitive? Okay, well, people might as well tell you, don't be so green-eyed. It's just your nature. No, nobody ever told you not to be green-eyed, but they told you not to be sensitive, which is as much part of your nature as the green eyes are. So in this society, sensitive people are hurt. Now, how do you prevent it? Is if the parents had the wherewithal and the awareness and the teachers to recognize sensitivity and to actually honor it and to cherish it. Because in traditional societies, the sensitive people were the shamans, they were the healers. In our society, don't be so weak. Don't be such a namby-pamby. Don't be so sensitive. So how do you prevent it? You can't as an individual, as a fetus, as an infant, as a small child, you can't. You can heal from the traumas, but you could hardly have prevented it.